Hello, everybody. I'm Happy Caldwell, and I want to thank you for joining us for today's special edition of Arkansas Alive, remembering 9/11. For many of us, September 11, 2001 is a day that we will not forget. 21 years ago, Americans came together, bonded by patriotism and sadness over the loss of so many lives over the largest terrorist attack of our country. With me today is retired Lieutenant General Joseph Worley, United States Air Force, who's going to share his firsthand account of what it was like inside the Pentagon when Flight 77 made a direct impact into that building. That's coming up right now, so stay tuned as Arkansas Alive begins right now. General, let me welcome you to Arkansas Alive.
Thank you.
And thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And you live right here in Little Rock?
I do.
And on September 11th, you were in the Pentagon.
I was.
And that's where your office was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And of course, it was unprovoked. We didn't know this attack was coming, so everybody was caught completely off guard. And I'd like to ask you some questions about first impressions, first thoughts of what was going on at the time. But let me take just a minute, if you would, to give our audience an understanding of where Lieutenant General Joseph Worley is coming from. He was a master navigator, 120 combat missions in Vietnam, more than 1,800 flying hours, primarily in the F-4 and 15 aircraft. Graduated West Point with a bachelor's degree, science degree in engineering, master's degree in business administration, management from the University of Arkansas, and is a graduate of National War College. Some of the reasons that you decided to enter the military: you transferred from Air Force into the Air Force from West Point.
Correct.
And you had numerous assignments during your career. And some of them, what was the most challenging assignment you ever had?
Well, in 33 years, I had a lot of assignments. Yeah. But the most challenging one is when I commanded 3rd Air Force over in England. Mm-hmm. I had responsibility for all U.S. Air Force forces from England all the way down past Germany. I was also the senior military advisor, really representing the United States or Her Majesty's government. But probably the most challenging was that I had responsibility for U.S. Air Force, any U.S. Air Force response in sub-Saharan Africa. Mm-hmm. And that's when we got deployed to Mozambique in 2000 to help the people of Mozambique recover from a flood. That was probably the most challenging mission I've ever had in my life.
Well, how did you wind up at the Pentagon on this particular day?
Well, after my assignment at 3rd Air Force, the Chief of Staff called me up and said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Well, I am." He says, "Congratulations, you're going to get promoted." I said, "What does that mean?" He says, "You're coming back to the Pentagon." This was in 2001, or 2000. And I said, "Well, what if I turn it down?" He says, "You can't. I'll see you in a month." You know how the military is. So we packed up and we moved back to the Pentagon. So I was at the Pentagon really from the summer of 2000. And then, of course, throughout the year. And then 9/11 hit in September 2001.
I guess everybody remembers where they were on September 11th, just like they remember where they were when President Kennedy was assassinated, mm-hmm. Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. You had no foreknowledge that anything like this was going to happen?
No, we did not.
No.
Of course, we had fought in the Persian Gulf War back in '93. You might recall in 1993 there was a bomb in the World Trade Center.
Yes, I do remember.
Interesting story. I went up there in about 1999, and we were escorted into one of the World Trade Center buildings, went all the way up to the upper floor, talked to one of the executives up there, and we kind of asked him, a bomb went off here in 1993. What have you done to prepare? And he kind of, nothing's going to happen. I said, well, you don't know. We don't know, but, they've already tried once. Yeah. They might try again. So to this day, I wonder if that individual is still around. So that we kind of knew that, they had plans, but it really wasn't at our forefront. So on September 11th, the Chief of Staff is having a staff meeting down for all the Air Force senior officers down in their operations center. And during a normal staff meeting, we talk about what's going on around the world, where our forces are deployed, what kind of issues are we dealing with. And at the end of that meeting, which is right around 9, about 8:45 or so, we were getting up, finishing the meeting to leave. And in that operations center, huge big three screens, and in those screens, all of a sudden the TV popped on, and one of the towers was on fire. Mm-hmm. So we all went back and sat down trying to figure out what happened. The announcer, if you recall that day, said, well, we hear there's an airplane that might have hit the building. Right. We think it was a small one, but maybe it was a big one, but we're not sure. All of us at that time said, that's impossible. We were looking at the World Trade Center. It was a beautiful day. I mean, how could anybody miss that? Yeah, that was our initial thought. And just as we sat down and watched it, we all saw the second airplane hit. Then we knew what the problem was. Mm-hmm. So we all got up. The operations people went and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. I went upstairs with the Vice Chief of Staff and was standing up there. We were scratching our heads saying, okay, what do we do now? And I'm looking out the window. If you've ever been to the Pentagon, it's obviously 5 sides. Right. And there's 5 rings in the Pentagon, A, B, C, D, E. The E ring is the outside ring. And I'm looking out the window at National Airport, Jefferson Memorial, and all of a sudden the phone rings. The Vice Chief of Staff picks up the phone. And he goes, okay, I got it. And he said, Joe, there's one coming into D.C. Mm. And I'm looking out the window thinking, are you an idiot? What am I going to do if I see an airplane flying by? And I started thinking, many years ago I had read a book by Tom Clancy where a 747, fiction of course, had hit the Capitol. And I said, I think a Capitol would be a great target because it's easy to see. Mm-hmm. Then the White House, but the White House is kind of hard. It's in the trees and stuff, and this is going to be coming in. I said, the third place is here. Mm. It could hit this building. And I'm talking to the Vice Chief of Staff. I said, is there any way that we can, that you know of, that we can get an announcement out to get everybody out of the E-ring and into the center? Because if the airplane hits, in my thinking, it's going to hit on the outside of the building. It's not going to dive into the center of the building. So he made a couple phone calls, and they had a very antique radio, if you will, announcement system that, when someone would talk, you couldn't understand what they were saying. And just then, all of us felt the whole building shake. Now, there weren't the flight restrictions over D.C. at that time. No, not at that time. So anybody could have, Right. We got to remember how quickly it happened. Oh, yeah. And so at 9:37, it hit the Pentagon. First airplane hit the World Trade Center about 8:45. Do you believe that was designed by the terrorists to threaten our military prowess? And you hit the Pentagon, you've hit... I would have no idea what was in their mind. I just kind of thought we'd be one of the 3 targets if the airplane was coming back to D.C. I really kind of thought it would be in the Capitol building. Yeah. That was I was thinking. But yeah, Capitol or the White House. So what happened when the impact took place, when the plane exploded? Was there, damage control? Of course, the Pentagon doesn't have any weapons to speak of, no defense weapons. True. So you were just at the mercy of,
repairing damage, saving people's lives?
Well, the first thing when the building shook. Now I was facing east. The airplane hit really from the west, northwest, so it was kind of behind my left shoulder. Yeah. And then we said, that's probably it. And then we heard a bunch of people running. Obviously, people wanted to get out of the building. So we didn't have to get asked. Everybody wanted to get out of the building. So when I exited the building on the east side, I looked over my left shoulder, and there was a huge black smoke. You've probably seen the pictures.
Yeah.
And so everybody in the Pentagon, and I think there was about maybe 15, 20,000 people that worked in there.
Wow.
They're all out there, not over there where the fire was, but all outside trying to evacuate. And so we were outside. We're looking at that. Then we saw a couple F-16s fly over. We got pretty excited about that. But it was too late for that particular building, that particular flight. So when we got out, we were all trying to make sense of what had happened. And just then the rumor came by, said there's another one coming to D.C. So I'm thinking to myself, well, it could be the Capitol, but if I was flying that airplane, if I've got 20,000 Americans standing outside, I think I would probably fly into them.
Right.
So a little self-preservation came in. I walked towards the Potomac River, and I said, if I see an airplane, I'm jumping in, and I'm going to swim underneath that bridge over there. I think a lot of people had that idea.
Yeah.
But then we heard it's not coming, and that was the one that crashed in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. The change that 9/11 brought, was there a change in the military in any way? I know that's a broad question, but...
Well, we'd always been focused. We were worried about, we'd been fighting a Cold War for many years. And of course, we had the Persian Gulf War, so we had a lot of forces deployed into the Middle East. From my perspective, we were primed and ready to do something, but this galvanized us to the point where, okay, now we know what we have to do, because we're not going to allow this to continue.
Right.
Of course, we follow the directions of the president. If the president didn't want us to do anything, we wouldn't, but we were ready to do something.
Yeah.
And so we had a focus on the Middle East, but we certainly did not expect this type of an attack. At least I didn't.
Do you think 9/11 changed the military in any way? Military had been maybe diminished, decreasing, not as many enlistments, et cetera, but did that bring a new sense of patriotism? And
yeah, it did. If you go back to after I fought in Vietnam, the military was at a pretty low ebb.
Yeah. And
it took us 20 years to
rebuild,
gain the respect of the American people, the confidence of the American people. And then, of course, remember the Persian Gulf War in 1993. The military did very, very well. I mean, it was quick, which Americans, I believe, like a quick, decisive, if you're going to go and fight to win.
Yeah.
And we don't like anything that's drug out, if you will. So we were on a pretty big high. But, of course, when this happened, it just galvanized us even more. A lot of good things happened during the Persian Gulf War of how the different services worked together. We had been working on that for 9-10 years, and so we were ready to do something if the president wanted us to do something.
How do you view the reaction of the nation after 9/11? I don't want to put you in a position of political forecasting, but how do you think the nation reacted after that?
Well, I think from what I could see, enlistment was up. You've read stories of a lot of people that said, well, I was in college, I was doing this, and all of a sudden I dropped and I'm going. It's kind of like Pearl Harbor, right? People who were motivated to do that said, now I'm going to go fight, because now I have a reason to do it.
Right.
Many wars in the past there was always two sides to the story. why are we doing this?
Yeah.
If you recall, right before 9/11, they just had the election in 2000. So you had Bush versus Gore. You remember how divisive that was. So the country was divided quite a bit, kind of like it is now. And this galvanized not only the military, but from what I could see, talking to friends of mine and people that I met, it galvanized the American people. You know, they put all of the petty jealousies aside and they said, okay, now we know this is a war that we know we need to fight because we can't allow this to continue, because if you don't stop it now, it could very well start again. There's a great video, if you haven't seen it. It was a documentary of right after 9/11 when there was a baseball game in Yankee Stadium, and they asked President Bush to come out and throw the first pitch. And so if you get an opportunity to see that documentary, it was inside before he went out, and they're talking to him and stuff, and the reaction that he got when he walked out on the field was incredible. Yeah. And there were people who probably didn't vote for him in the stands, but everybody knew this is what we need to do.
Yeah. So. Commander-in-Chief. Okay, now, 21 years later, after the attack, how do you perceive our military readiness, our attitude? How do the young people, the young men and young women, how do they view military and terrorism? You know, we seem as a nation to want to appease those that want to kill us, and we need to be ready because their ideology has not changed. And I work a lot with Christians United for Israel. I was in on some of the planning of the what is now the Abraham Accords. I met with Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt, Trump's son-in-law and attorney, at the East Wing, the West Wing, as they were fomenting on that, because they wanted another perspective. And Christians United for Israel is over 10 million members now, and we were trying to advise them on what would happen if Trump moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The terrorist mindset has not changed. It's still the same. The Bible talks about the sons Isaac and Ishmael, and said Ishmael was a man of war, and every hand was against him. And they've already said many, many times, we hate you, we hate Israel, we're going to kill everybody we can. So how do we prepare for something other than, you know, I know the military, especially the Air Force, is constantly vigilant, and of course Israel, the IDF, is always looking at what can we do short of World War III, what can we do to deter the development of nuclear and so forth. So how does the Pentagon, how does the armed forces, I know you're representing the Air Force, what do we do currently to avoid another one of these attacks?
Well, I haven't been back there for 17 years, so I don't exactly know what they're doing, but I do know that it's the same as when I was there. They're always constantly looking at different triggers, different things that are going on, moving forces around depending on the intelligence. So, I mean, they're not 100% foolproof. No intelligence is 100% foolproof, but all you can do is do the best you can based on the intelligence that you have.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that they have plans in place. I don't expect, again, we work for the direction of the president. So, the military has to either react or not react depending on how he feels. Right. So it's one of those things where it's a constant challenge. So you go to bed at night thinking, I hope I thought of everything. Yeah. I hope the intelligence I have is correct. So specifically, I can't tell you because I don't know. The one thing I do know is that the American people are very short-sighted. You're talking about 9/11. I would probably guess that September 11th is going to come up, and then some people aren't even going to think about it.
Yeah.
Except maybe watching this broadcast or other things that are on television or in social media about 9/11. And then just remember that people, if you're less than 21 years old, you don't know anything about it.
That's
you
right.
You didn't experience it. You didn't feel anything. You don't have any recollection of where was I when this happened.
Yeah.
And it's up to people like you, me, and other folks who've experienced it to try to remind people of what it was like. But even with all of that, I believe you just can't capture the feeling that people had back then, how vulnerable we felt as a nation. And I know the military and the government doesn't want to feel like that anymore. That's about the best I could tell you. So.
General, you spent your adult life in serving in the military. We have about 5 minutes left. What would you encourage young people today concerning military service, concerning maybe a career in the military? I would not necessarily emphasize career just as a job, a profession, but as service to your country. America's always had a great military, and our founding father George Washington and Valley Forge and all the things related to our first president and other presidents and all the things we've endured. What would you say to the young people today to stimulate them to consider serving in the military? We hear a lot about it, both positive and negative, but I'm sure there are those that are watching right now that'd like to hear what you have to say.
Well, there's going to be a certain section of the younger generation that has that desire to serve, and they want to serve right now, and so they'll go and enlist. That's probably a smaller section than it was, a group than it probably was in the past. There's another section that probably hasn't considered it that much, unless their parents or their grandparents were in the military. They really don't have a lot of association with the military. In my opinion, there's a feeling where parents generally want their kids to go off to college.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that what I found when I was in the military, some of these folks went off to college, but they weren't ready for it. Mm-hmm. They were immature. I had a bunch of airmen, almost every airman that I talked with, they tried college, it didn't work, and they realized they needed to do something. They said, I'm not succeeding here, my grade point average is ridiculously low, I'm not interested in this, I got to do something. And the ones who thought about it said, maybe I'll join the military and see what it's all about. The maturity that you gain when you go into the military, even if it's at 2 years or 3 years, the maturity that you gain is invaluable.
Yeah.
And I would encourage people to at least consider that if your son or daughter is not that interested in going to college, or you feel you're wasting your money going to college, spending on them, and they graduate with a degree that maybe is unemployable. So I would urge them to at least look at it. It's not for everybody. But I can tell you the airmen that I talked to that went through that, I'd always ask them, why did you join the Air Force? Why did you join the military? And it was always the same. It was, I tried college, I didn't like it, I wasn't succeeding, and then I joined the military. Well, what have you done? Well, I've deployed, I've done this, I've seen that, I've been overseas, I've done this. Have you started school again on the GI Bill? Yes, I have. How's your grade point average? 4.0.
Yeah.
Almost every one of them. And it took those 2 or 3 years of maturity for them to realize there's something more than just going to college after high school. So I would suggest that after high school, unless your son or daughter is so motivated and have an ambition to be get a certain type of degree and are dedicated and focused on that, give something else a chance to let them mature, whether it be the military, the Peace Corps, something, or go find a trade, and learn about that. But don't, in my opinion, waste your money on sending someone to college that doesn't want to be there.
You know, that sounds like my story. I was 2 years in college and not fulfilled. So, and my father always told me that I needed to serve in some way. So I joined the Navy, went to boot camp, served total of 6 years, came back, used the GI Bill to go back to college. The whole culture had changed. All my friends were gone. They weren't down at the Dairy Queen anymore. When I came home and I wanted to visit with everybody, they weren't the same. I wasn't the same. And I looked at everything in a more mature way, in a more disciplined way. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, when did you enlist in the military? How old were you when you started?
18. When I went to West Point.
Yeah.
Right.
And you've had a very distinguished military career, and we're very thankful that you walked away from that Pentagon attack. And
so am I.
Yeah, I'm sure you had several people that didn't.
Yes, none that I knew because it hit in the Army side.
Yeah.
But it hit on a Tuesday. My wife and I came back to the Pentagon. In fact, you might want to know that the next day, Wednesday, we all reported back to the Pentagon for duty, even though the smoke was still going.
One day.
One day, the next day, because we weren't going to let them see that it somehow damaged the military. And then the upcoming Saturday, my wife and I went and we comforted the soldiers that were coming out of the burning building, finding the bodies and stuff, and talking to them and trying to comfort them. It's the least we could do. We certainly didn't want to get in their way, but that's the least we could do.
Well, thank you for being my guest on this eve of 9/11. Thank you for your input, and thank you for your service. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
God bless you. And thank you for joining us. Remember, Jesus is Lord over Arkansas and where you're watching, too.
Send your questions, comments, and testimonies to Happy Caldwell at Post Office Box 26207, Little Rock, Arkansas 72221, or email happycaldwell@vtntv.com. Remember to follow VTN on Facebook at VTN Your Arkansas Christian Connection, and follow Happy Caldwell on Twitter at Happy_Caldwell. VTN is on Roku. Search VTN in the channel store and add us to your lineup. Today's episode is available to watch on demand at VTNTV.com and click Watch. You can also watch VTN via live stream at VTNTV.com.